Is tanking really a problem in the NFL? Do we need a lottery? That and so many more questions on the topic here on Locked On Vikings.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to my hashtag everydayers for coming and hanging out every single day, especially here deep in May. We are in the forest, the deep, dark forest of football off season. And that means we get to have some more generalized conversations. We don't have to cover the news of the hour. There is no news of the hour. So we can talk about stuff like the generalities of something like tanking. So I have reached out to somebody who just released a video on tanking in sports. We're going to focus mostly on the NFL. But hello, Hayden. Please tell me about your tanking video, broad strokes, elevator pitch. And by the way, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Luke, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to be doing this. Hi, all the Vikings fans out there. So I have my channel. It's called Hayden, Hydn, and I generally post more long form sports content. This one I just threw out there is called Tanking in Sports, and it's got a real good reception so far. I go through mostly focusing on baseball, basketball, and football, the big three pro sports leagues. And I go through tanking in each of those three leagues over kind of the inception of tanking. Although, as I talk about in that video, tanking isn't really, you can't really put a timeline on when it was created.
Like a debatable like what was the inception?
Yeah. So I threw the 84 Rockets there as one of the earliest tanking teams, but the strategy's been around forever. But that video was kind of a very open, broad, just looking at the entire issue of tanking and if it even is an issue, and then giving some solutions at the end on how to fix it.
And yeah, so I want to talk to you about those solutions in the brainstorms process and stuff, because you came up with some absolutely off the wall ideas, but it does make sense. But I also just want to say that, so I found your channel about a year ago with, I think it was a video on the, or maybe it was less than a year ago, on the Iron Bowl rivalry. Phenomenal stuff. The longest baseball game ever. Phenomenal stuff. We can just call a spade a spade. You like me at times are one of these like John Boyce offshoots that it populates YouTube, and I think just about every one of them is awesome. And I have it on great authority. I think he said it on this show that John feels the same. I think he thinks all these people are the coolest people ever. So
yeah,
you're doing
John,
awesome work. Everyone should definitely go check out your channel.
I appreciate the shout out a lot, John. And I've been seeing this comment kind of start to roll in a good amount. He really is like one of the most influential filmmakers in the entire history of sports media, which is like an amazing thing. But no, he's super. I've reached out to him just on Twitter DMs a couple times. He's always been super helpful because I've had the like, oh, another John Boyce, and it's kind of a mixed. Most people like having more John Boyce style content. There's some who, see it as copyright type of thing, but everything I've
nobody in the world who actually does it cares about.
And everything I've gotten from
keep
John
making things in the style. It's good content. It's cool.
Yeah. Super positive feedback. He gave me a shout out on one of his on Bluesky on his social media platform, which was like one of my crowning achievements on YouTube so far.
That's awesome. So this one's about tanking, and it's about those major three sports. Apparently hockey is not in there because stay tuned is the vibe.
Yeah. I had a whole part of the script about Mario Lemieux, but I have a full Mario Lemieux just like documentary on him, his career and life after career with management of the Penguins. And I'm really excited for that video, which will probably be one of my next 2 or 3 that's coming out. So I wanted to save the hockey stories there. And I already am kind of regretting it because there's a good amount of comments about people talking about how active tanking is in the NHL.
For sure. Well, that'll all get resolved in time. But for us, let's focus a little bit more on football and the sort of origins of the tank in football. The first football team to ever really tank, and this kind of gets into the one of the bigger debates about tanking is what's the difference between tanking and sucking. Like the 1970s Buccaneers were as bad gets. They were first or second every single year in the draft. They, 0-26, of course. Like the Buccaneers at their start were the laughing stock of the league, but that wasn't a tank. Something that was a tank would be like you go into a whole thing about the late 80s Cowboys and early 90s Cowboys, Herschel Walker trade. We don't need to talk too much about it. But what I guess is, where do you draw the line between like sucking, like those, early 70s Buccaneers, rebuilding, like what you could say the Cowboys did, or I would call what the Lions have done right now as like it's a rebuild.
Yeah.
And then something like a purposeful tanking, like what Stephen Ross and Brian Flores and everybody's in trouble for the 2019 Dolphins. Like, where do you draw that line?
I think it's kind of a gray area thing where you can't draw a line in one place, but I really do think like the full intense version of tanking where they are actively I think that's really rare. I think that's a lot more rare than people think it is, where teams are actually trying to lose these games so that they don't want the second overall pick, they want the first pick. They are all in on losing games. I think that's a lot more rare than what people kind of believe it to be. And the question of rebuilding versus tanking, that's one I talked directly about in the video. That one's just impossible to answer. But you brought up the Buccaneers.
You need sources. Like you need journalism for that.
Yeah, and you brought up the Buccaneers, which is an interesting one because they obviously had some lousy ownership in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a theme that that I didn't even expect, but with basically all the teams I went through is they either went through an ownership change around that period where they're famous for tanking, or they had infamously horrible ownership like those Buccaneers teams.
I've never really thought about it in that context of like, if you want to tank, you need a bad owner.
Yeah, no, it
like,
kind of is. And that's the conclusion.
Ownership needs to sign off, but yeah.
Yeah, the conclusion I came to in that video is that tanking doesn't work, which if you go by that logic, it makes sense that a bad owner would want to tank. But I didn't.
Because they wouldn't know better.
Yeah, they wouldn't know. But I didn't even really go into it planning anything about ownership. But I just as researching, I realized the Houston Rockets got sold. 2 years later, they went into that deep tank. Jerry Jones buys the Cowboys. 2 years later, they're in this deep tank.
Yeah.
Kind of a theme that just reemerged.
To me, Stephen Ross is the owner that is synonymous with tanking. Like the two and like recent tanks that I can think of that are as blatant gets are those Dolphins that you mentioned in the video, and then the Sashi Brown Browns that go 1-31 over 2 years. The Hugh Jackson thing, there, and Sashi comes directly from the school of thought of Sam Hinkie, who's very much mentioned in your video, trust the process and all that. So it's the process Browns. And what I see is, in your video, you go over a whole thing that basically is like having the first overall pick does not get you a Super Bowl. That's the conclusion, right?
Yeah.
And while that's like a really narrow thing, and I do kind of want to talk about that study a little bit more in a bit, if you talk about the top 5 picks or making it to a championship game or like broaden the scope a little bit, you maybe would get different data. But for me, what I see with the teams that like famously tanked, not, full rebuild, but famously tanked, they created such a broken roster, broken culture, broken everything that they are now so bad that the first overall pick can't help them enough. Maybe it's a good player, right? You can be really bad and put Calvin Johnson on the god-awful Lions, and then draft Matt Stafford the next year, and you got a quarterback and a wide receiver duo that are like great, and the best they're going to do is a wild card exit.
Yeah,
like it's a great way to win 9 games and like being in the hunt graphic in December, and like that's about where it tops out to me. Because you have so much building to do, and that takes a long time. So by the time you're done with the rookie contract of that guy you tanked for, you still only have 2/3 of a team.
Yeah, and you brought up that word culture. I think that's a big thing in tanking is when you're intentional, especially I know we're focusing on football, but in a sport like baseball where it's these longer tanks, when you're intentionally shutting your team down like that, you're even if you're drafting and trading for guys in a few years to better your roster, the base of your roster, the core is that team that you just tanked with. So you've implemented this losing culture, just this
Mhm.
penchant for losing in the core of your team that you're building around. Maybe you don't have your star on that team yet. He isn't used to it, but one guy, it's not even in basketball where one guy makes the biggest difference. You can't do it on just one guy. You need the winning culture, which is hard to reverse when you have a losing culture.
Yeah. And that doesn't drive at when I would say this conversation comes up the most, which is the final week of the regular season of every NFL season. That's
Yep.
when people I think talk about it the most. And I want to get at that with you next here on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you are looking to get into the action, even though the NBA playoffs are almost over, that doesn't mean it's too late. You can sign up at FanDuel.com and get in on the action, whether you think it's going to be a Nas Reed 3-point thing or just the regular spread or total points or money line or something like that. Or you could go all the way to the champion or even NFL futures bets. You can take like the 49ers plus 170 to win the NFC West, whatever it is. You can find it on FanDuel. And if you win your first bet, just put $5 on anything. If you win that bet, you get $200 in bonus bets. 40-1 odds on whatever your first bet is, so choose wisely. That is at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I'm here with Hayden, a YouTuber who did a video about tanking. And I want to continue the conversation right where we left off, which is let me talk to you about the Doug Peterson situation. Are you familiar with how Doug Peterson ended in Philadelphia?
Yeah. The end of that tenure. Yeah.
The end of that season, it was week 17, because I don't think it was a 17 game season yet. And final game of the regular season, they pull rookie Jalen Hurts at halftime
Yep.
to of a game that they were losing pretty well. And they put in like Nate Sudfeld, I think.
Yes.
And
Yes.
players revolted. I mean, players were like outwardly angry at Doug Peterson for doing this. They said, we still want our chance to win a game. We don't care about this, blah, blah, blah.
I
Like,
think Kelsey pushed him on the sideline. Yeah.
yeah. And like there were comments afterwards.
Yeah.
So like I think from Jalen Hurts himself, he was like mad about it. So I think that's a really interesting case study, because while I think it's pretty rare to find somebody that's all in about, hey, I would love for my team to lose all of its games this year to get the next top draft pick. There's still that sentiment once you are eliminated from the playoffs, where you go, well, now I don't want to win. Now who cares? Now let's get some draft picks. We're out this year. Once you are actually eliminated, and I think that's where it gets a lot murkier. Like, players still want to win that game. I call it ham sandwich theory. You could put a ham sandwich on the line and everybody's going to play really hard, because that's just how NFL players are wired.
Yep.
But also GMs and coaches might be a little different.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% correct. It's those end of season, like the normally meaningless games, the 4-win versus a 5-win team that just means it might shuffle around some draft position. And in football, a sport like football, tanking's not necessarily the worst, but when you only have this 17 game season. So if you're tanking the last 2 games, you're potentially tanking like 20% of your home games for the season. Like 20% of the time season ticket holders get to see you, you're literally not giving effort, which that's why it's so bad in the NFL. You tank 1 game, that's a real percentage of your season that you've just basically taken away from the fans. And I went in that video, I focused on a random game 82 in the 84 Rockets season. And I think it was the Clippers Jazz game 82. And the Clippers didn't own their first pick. And by losing that game, they reshuffled the order of the 1984 NBA draft, which obviously any reshuffling between those 5 guys just rewrites NBA history. And you're rewriting history from the most meaningless Clippers Jazz no playoff team game 82. And that's it's crazy how big of an impact something like that can have.
Yeah, and it's different too in the NBA, and we should maybe get into this because the first and second pick in the NBA are like very markedly different from the fourth and fifth pick. Like that matters a lot. Whereas in the NFL, you get plenty of situations where, you know, a Jaguars team gets Trevor Lawrence, and he's supposed to be the dude, and they kind of become a maybe wild card team that is struggling. Whereas the Lions go number 2 and they get Aiden Hutchinson, and then they become something different. That happens all the time. Or what we just saw last year, right? Jaden Daniels outplaying Caleb Williams right off the bat. It's the draft is just so much harder in the NFL than the NBA, which I think that effect is even worse in the MLB, where like God knows whatever happens with those
the
guys.
MLB is just a crapshoot in the draft.
Total crapshoot.
And you brought this up earlier. I went just looking at number 1 overall picks, and if I had an infinite staff, infinite time to research these, there's a lot better ways I could have done that data. I did actually go and do the same thing just with number 2 overall picks. I just kind of felt like it looked repetitive in the video, but I really wish I had the abilities to find like a full weighted for the entire first round, how successful those picks are compared to how high you're picking them. And I think something like that would paint the story in a much more accurate way.
That would be very interesting data. And there have been other studies. There is one from actually a listener of this show who also has kind of dabbled with some analytics stuff about like the stickiness from good to bad teams. And from like good to great, and from bad to great, and from mediocre to great. And like the conclusion was essentially that most of this is random, right? Like you have all kinds of things where the Bengals are going to be 3-13 and then they're going to be a Super Bowl contender the next year. Like that happens constantly. So there's so much random noise in it that it's hard to find any pattern. The only thing that has any signal at all is that like bad teams stay bad. Like that there's enough of these like disaster cycles with like, the Jets, right? That will hire a coach, suck for 3 years, fire the coach, hire a coach, suck for 3 years, fire a coach. The Browns are in the same cycle. And like there's enough of that for there to be some kind of signal, but essentially it's hard to get to the top. It's hard to stay at the top, but being, 8-8 because you have some semblance of a team versus being, really bad and having to, add 10 wins to your roster in one season. Yeah, you get a better draft pick, but that's like not enough to make up the difference. That was essentially the conclusion.
And I think it's interesting because I mean, there are people looking at draft picks specifically, but like you were saying, one of your viewers just looks at the like wider analytical, and it's great because there are people who right now are getting paid like 6 figures. It is their full-time job to work for a sports team and try to find the patterns in the analytics to see what stats you want to try to maximize for your team. And it's interesting. I have another video about defense if defense really wins championships that I'm working on. And it's a lot of the same stat. Like you look through all the different defensive rating stats to just try and find the correlations between teams that actually go on to win. And it is just so random.
The answer is like, well, sometimes it does.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it always seems like.
But one of the things about your method, and you're one guy and you have the limitations that you have in terms of like bandwidth. But there is, I think, a merit to looking at the first overall pick in particular because it responds to that week 18 argument that, well, but the Giants should have lost that game against the Cowboys because then they would be maybe picking first overall. Or, so I go on Locked On NFL every Wednesday. I'm actually recording it right after I record this with Tyler Rowland. He covers the Titans on Locked On Titans, and he also does Locked On NFL. He on Locked On Titans was calling for the Titans to lose for like the last 4 weeks of the season. They were eliminated.
Yeah.
It was over. And he wanted, like, please lose Titans. Please do not be stupid. He would like be critical of them if they accidentally won a game.
Yeah.
Because to him, the first overall pick specifically is an important thing. And if you end up second, you screwed up. So like looking at that and saying, yeah, having the first overall pick specifically actually isn't going to be your golden ticket is, I think, a compelling point. Even if there's, yeah, the second overall pick would be an interesting study too. I do think that there's like something there's a kernel of something really interesting in there looking at specifically, does the first overall pick win you the Super Bowl? And the answer is that it not on its own.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because when you look at it from the point of view of a bad team, you play devil's advocate, it's really hard to justify that you shouldn't lose those games, that it's not the best
For
thing
sure.
long
It's an
term for your plan.
unassailable point.
It's really hard.
Better
Yeah.
draft pick is better fact. And, winning
Yeah,
another game right now
exactly.
doesn't matter. Yeah.
And you look at a class like this year's where you kind of had a far and away QB1. I can definitely see what your Titans friends getting at, and it's hard even if on like a moral ethical level you disagree. It's hard to create an argument against that.
For sure. And maybe we can talk about the ethical level as well as some of your solutions to the tanking problem in other sports, because I think you had some fascinating ideas that I want to share with my listeners. That'll be next here on Locked On Vikings. Moving along here with Hayden here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. How do you respond to the idea? I mean, so you have sort of skipped the ethical point and said, hey, conceding that we're okay with the idea of tanking entirely, it still like doesn't really give you the benefit that's maybe worth the cost. And I think the costs of tanking are the underrated part. Where like, especially in a short-term world like the NFL, where you might only have this guy on your team for 3 years and you just wasted one of those years, or guys get old, guys get expensive. But there's also the ethical thing where it's just people don't want to watch a team that doesn't want to win. And I think you mentioned that with one of your examples of like attendance was like there's just nothing. You want to watch game 80 of the 84 Rockets, nobody's showing up. Everybody's not there. And you can see this in the NBA today. The Pelicans or the Jazz or whoever, go look at the crowd in one of their late game things. Nobody wants to watch Tank Patrol unless LeBron's coming to town or something like that. And I remember that growing up as a Timberwolves fan when they were terrible forever and ever and ever. And eventually it stopped being, I want to see the Timberwolves. It was, what game's going to have Kobe Bryant coming to town? That was when the tickets got expensive.
And we were talking about that 29. I'm a Dolphins fan personally, and we were talking about that 2019 Dolphins team that, from a fan's point of view who watches every game that team's played for the last decade, I would put money that they were losing those. The Brian Flores was not lying when he said he was offered $100,000 to lose every game, because you can tell when you're watching it. When you watch every one of a team's games, you can tell those differences.
There was a fascinating thing in your video that I totally forgot about, which was during the suck for luck thing, which is another example of a team that successfully tanked, got the golden boy, and then kind of topped out as a wild card team.
Yeah, they dug themselves too deep a hole.
Right. And there were other issues going on in Indianapolis with Andrew Luck and stuff that might have worked out better over the long term, but that's kind of part of it. Is sometimes your guy gets hurt a lot and then suddenly you tanked for a dude that retires in 2019. But with the Dolphins also being involved in that tank right when Stephen Ross takes over, like I will forever now associate Stephen Ross with being a loser.
Yeah, because as you should,
twice in a decade,
as anyone should.
Stephen Ross loser. Like, this is no longer an allegation. He's enthusiastically a loser.
Yeah, and you look at all the playoff games that the Dolphins have won because of that tanking.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Again, the Dolphins, another example, topping out as like 7 seed, right? Are they going to be the same guys? Or will they be able to take another step now? Or is Tua not good enough because he wasn't worth tanking for Tua? So I guess that's the question, is like the ethical part of it for you. Is it more of, as a fan, I don't want to watch that? Or is it more of like a perspective thing of like, you shouldn't want to be a loser?
So that's another one of the really tough questions to answer to me. In my video, I kind of just left it open-ended. I kind of let people develop their own opinion on the ethics of it all.
The video wasn't really about this.
Yeah, I
I'm
wasn't
putting the
talking.
screws to you a little bit.
Yeah. I don't think that there's anything inherently like a anti-competitive with the because obviously it's good long-term thoughts for your franchise. You have good intentions in the long term. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that until like in making those front office decisions, in weakening your roster. I
Yeah,
don't think there's
rebuilding.
I don't think
GMs
there's anything
rebuild,
wrong with that
coaches can tank. Yeah.
until it gets onto the floor, when it's happening on the court or on the field. Is when was when I try to draw the line. When a coach is I talked about one of those Dolphins play calls, and I think it was in that 2019 season, when they had that tank bowl against the Redskins,
Yeah, the
and
bubble screen.
yeah, they call a mid screen on third on for their 2-point conversion from the 2-yard line. One of the most mind-boggling calls I've ever seen.
That's funny that you chose that one because there's a much more famous one from that year. Um, and I know this because, hey, we cover Brian Flores pretty strongly on this show. Um, and it was a Brian Flores like blitz call against, I think, the Raiders in a game in the at the end of the game that was like a Hail Mary situation, and they blitzed cover 0 and led up the last second touchdown
Yeah,
to lose.
yeah.
And that one got really famous. But once you know Brian Flores, you're like, actually, wait, he would probably do that if they were trying to
That's true.
like, and he did. He has here. He's blitzed in completely insane scenarios
Yeah,
here
he's
and
got the
got
track
burned, and
record.
sometimes it's great. Like that's just how Brian Flores goes. So like a crazy play call like that. I looked at that play a little bit further too. When I saw it in the video, I was like, huh, what did happen there? And you see two guys just total miscommunication and let a player in completely. I don't
Yeah.
think they had the numbers anyways for that, so the quarterback should have checked out. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting choice. I don't know if you avoided the defensive one because it is Brian Flores. It's a little bit more arguable, or
No,
if you just
that
decided to go for
actually
the
would
tank
have been a
ball.
great play. I did not come I remember that one you talking about. I remember watching it, but I didn't come across that one in the research. That would have been another good one to include.
Um, it's all fascinating, and I think I'm with you in that, like, this is where I draw the line between tanking and rebuilding. Definitionally, is rebuilding is blow up your roster, not care if you're fielding a bad roster, but once you get between the white lines, you're trying to win the game. And you're just making long-term decisions about prioritizing liquid assets over players or whatever. Once you get to the Doug Peterson part of like, I'm going to put in Nate Sudfeld because I don't care about winning this game and it's better for a draft position, then I think there has to be some kind of solution to that, which
Yeah.
it's pretty rare in the NFL. You maybe get it in the second half of a week 18 game. You're not going to see a lot of that. And the one time you did see it blatantly, well, there's a lot of litigation about that anyways with Stephen Ross and Brian Flores.
Yeah.
That and other problems. But in the NBA, in the MLB, you get 3 or 4 teams doing this every single year. So you and friends, family came up with a ton of solutions, and some of them were fascinating. What is the favorite solution that you came up with for this video? You don't have to tell us everything. Go watch the video if you want all of them. But
Yeah,
give us
so
a taste.
my favorite one was the one I showed at the very end, and that is we originally had the idea to the sort of college football playoff selection where you throw the committee, and obviously that was about the most controversial thing possible this past year. And so we were kind of toying around with that committee idea, and we eventually landed on every team's general manager coming together, and you basically, like, right now they lock some people in a room and they do the draft lottery, and then they come out and announce the results. We basically said you lock all the GMs in a room and don't let them come out until they have an order for the lottery.
That's such an out of pocket. Like, people are going to go crazy when they
Oh,
hear that idea, I think. But I get what you're saying. Like, the first thing is like, okay, so if I'm the Vikings GM, why would I ever give the Packers a good draft pick? But that's a universal case, right? The Giants GM is still saying the same thing about the Cowboys and so on. So it would cancel out.
Yeah, a
But
lot of those rivalries are going to cancel out.
like, how would that play out, do you think? Do you think that they would go in and say, okay, well, yeah, but the Panthers were the worst team, so they're going to get the first? But do you think they would eventually come to that consensus and the only dissenters would be the other teams in the NFC South? Or do you
I
think it would play out in a different way?
I do think that you could make it so you kind of punish teams that refuse to agree, basically. You get some sort of punishments, and we didn't think about all of exactly what that would be.
That might
But
happen naturally, just socially, right? Like if you
yeah,
get
yeah,
one guy that's being a
exactly.
huge
I
dick
I
the whole time, you're like, all right, well, you get the 14th picks. Screw
Yeah,
off.
I kinda see 2 ways it could unfold, and the more ideal one would be the draft exists to create parity in sports, to spread talent all the way, big markets and small markets, and I think we could see where these small teams literally just gang up on the New Yorks and LAs. It doesn't matter how bad the Lakers are, they're never gonna get a majority of votes for the first pick. And I think that's one way it could work out, but I sort of feel like it's more likely with the shady backroomness of the NBA that you start to see these people trade these as almost assets. They trade their vote, and you get these
That's what I
deals
was
where
gonna say.
teams are sort of actually what I kind of the first thing that came to mind was they're sort of stacking. So like you have the Cavs trade for the Pacers vote, and then the Cavs go out and say, "Hey, we'll give you our vote and the Pacers vote because we're already controlling that."
Mhm.
And you're sort of stacking these to get these big trades you can basically trade for the first pick no matter your record.
Right, and your GM vote becomes like an equal asset that
Yeah.
everyone just gets. All 32 NFL GMs would just get a vote, and
Yeah, it
then
just becomes another kind of block you can
yeah,
play with, which I feel like could add some more interesting possibilities
yeah,
to the league.
and an unweighted one, so it sort of
Yeah,
balances things out.
yeah,
Um, I think like that's just an idea nobody's come up with, and I find that super fascinating. And your whole thing too was like doing away with the lottery entirely and finding a different way to determine draft order beyond just reverse standings or doing some sort of ping pong ball nonsense that nobody likes.
yeah, I'm pretty adamant, and I might have gone a little too hard on it in the video, but I'm pretty adamant that the draft lottery is a complete failure. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
I'm shocked that it still exists.
me too. And I'm shocked that people are advocating for more lotteries. Like
Yeah,
the
and
NFL should add a lottery. It's like, well,
yeah,
why would you
it
ask the NFL? This is the one that drives me nuts. Why would you ask the NFL to have a lottery? It both doesn't solve the problem you purport to need to solve, and also that problem doesn't need to be solved in the NFL.
Yeah, and the baseball just added theirs. It's why, and every time you get these talking heads on ESPN talking about how to end tanking, they're just talking about tweaking the lottery for the 100th time instead of
Yeah,
trying an actual new approach.
right. So in that video ends in a literal brainstorm session with like people around a table. Uh, and so I think even though like there's probably a whole bunch of problems with the GM like backroom idea where it's easily corruptible and there's all kinds of ulterior motives and stuff. And parity probably wouldn't be the biggest priority of everybody in that room. But like, you know what? No bad ideas when you're in a brainstorm sesh. I love it. I love the video. I strongly recommend it. I'll link it in the show notes or YouTube description for everybody. I'll tag you in the title and stuff. Hayden, plug something else. We know where you find your channel. What can we be excited about?
So I have one video that is probably going to be not my next one, but the one after that. And I don't want to give anything away, but I will say that it is truly unlike anything I've ever seen in a YouTube video, and it is the most interactive experience that I think viewers will have ever had on YouTube.
Can you give it a sport that it has anything to do with?
I think it will be in basketball.
Okay.
I
Excellent.
think should be just about all in the NBA.
Excellent. A thing that Minnesotans really like thinking about right now is basketball. Uh,
Yeah, good luck with that.
Hayden, thank you so much for your time. This was an awesome conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Luke. It was fun.
And thank you for listening to the Locked On Vikings podcast. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.